Commander Ethan Caldwell walked straight up to the new recruit, grabbed her duffel bag off her shoulder, and dumped every single item onto the wet concrete in front of 40 men. This, he said, kicking her gear across the ground, is what a mistake looks like. He didn't lower his voice. He wanted them all to hear. Somebody pulled a string to get you here, sweetheart, and I'm going to spend every day proving you don't belong. Maya Whitaker didn't flinch. She just looked at him and said 6 words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Before we go on, if you love a story about the person nobody believed in, please subscribe to the channel and follow this all the way to the end because the ending is going to surprise you. And do me a favor, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from right now. I want to see how far this story travels around the world. Now let's begin. Part 1. The rookie nobody believed in. The 6 words Maya Whitaker spoke were quiet. They were not loud and they were not angry. I'm here because I earned it, sir. That was all. She bent down slowly without any rush at all, and she began picking her things up off the wet ground, one piece at a time. She folded a shirt that didn't need folding. She wiped the mud off a canteen with the corner of her sleeve. She did not look up at Commander Caldwell. She did not look at the 40 men standing in formation watching her humiliation. She simply gathered what was hers the way a person gathers their dignity, piece by piece, and she put it all back into the bag. The silence on that training field at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was so heavy, you could have heard a coin drop into the sand. Ethan Caldwell had done this 100 times before. He had broken bankers' sons and college wrestlers and cocky Marines who thought they already knew everything. He knew exactly how a person reacted when you stripped their pride in public. They shouted, they cried, they begged, they swung, and every single time the moment they reacted, he had them. Because a man who loses his temper on day one has already told you everything you need to know about the last day. But this woman gave him nothing. That bothered him more than any curse word could have. You earned it, Caldwell repeated, and he let out a short, ugly laugh. He turned to the men behind him. You hear that? She earned it. 26 years old, no combat deployments, no unit, came out of some civilian rescue outfit, whatever that means, and she earned a spot standing next to men who bled for that trident. Nobody in formation moved. Nobody dared. Caldwell stepped closer to Maya until he was near enough that she could feel the heat of his words. Let me tell you how this works. I don't care who sent you. I don't care whose desk you crawled off of. In 3 weeks, you'll be gone. You'll quit, or you'll break, or you'll get hurt, and I'll write it up nice and clean, and everybody will go back to normal. The only choice you get to make is how much it hurts on the way out. Maya zipped her bag closed. She stood up, and then she did the one thing he wasn't ready for. She looked him dead in the eye, calm as a still lake, and she said, "Understood, sir. I'll be ready in the morning." Then she turned and walked toward the barracks like the whole thing had been a weather report. Caldwell watched her go, and for one strange second, a feeling crawled up the back of his neck that he did not have a name for. It wasn't respect. He wouldn't have called it that. But it was the feeling a man gets when he throws a punch at what he thinks is glass and his fist bounces off steel. He shook it off. He always shook it off. Get to work, he barked at the men, and the field came back to life. Later that evening in the mess hall, the story of the woman who didn't flinch was already traveling from table to table. It moved the way stories move on a base, quiet and fast, whispered over trays of food. At one table sat the core of Bravo 12, the team Caldwell had built with his own hands. There was Marcus Doyle, the biggest man on the team, a former linebacker with a laugh that could shake windows. There was Ray Ortega, older, quieter, the one everybody trusted to keep his head when things went wrong. There was Tyler Voss, young and hungry and full of opinions, the kind of man who mistook his own confidence for wisdom. And there was Danny Reyes, the Joker, the one who could find something funny in a house fire. You should have seen it, Tyler was saying, leaning over his tray. Cap dumped her whole bag out, right there, everybody watching, and she just picked it up. Didn't say boo. She said something, Danny cut in. She said she earned it. That got a round of snorts. Earned it, Marcus rumbled, shaking his head. Man, I earned my way here through Hell Week twice because I quit the first time and came back. You know what it took? It took losing everything and crawling back on my hands and knees. And they hand a spot to a rescue diver who never fired a shot in anger. We don't know that, Ray said quietly. The whole table looked at him. Ray Ortega didn't talk much. When he did, people listened mostly because they'd learned the hard way that he was usually right. We don't know what she did before, Ray went on, stirring his coffee slow. None of us do. That file's locked up tighter than the armory. You ever seen that A recruit's whole background sealed? That's exactly the point, Tyler shot back. It's sealed because somebody's hiding how she got in. Somebody with stars on their shoulder made a phone call. That's the only way a nobody walks onto this base. Ray shrugged, but he didn't argue. Not because he agreed, because he'd learned that when men have already decided how they feel, arguing just makes them dig in deeper. Whatever she is, Marcus said, she won't last. Cap's got it handled. And they laughed and they moved on to other things, and not one of them noticed the woman sitting alone at the far end of the mess hall eating quietly, listening to every single word without any expression on her face at all. Maya Whitaker had heard men underestimate her before. She'd heard it in a collapsed parking structure in the middle of the night when a fire captain twice her age told her the space was too tight and too unstable for anyone to crawl into, and she'd crawled in anyway and dragged out a 14-year-old boy who would otherwise have died in the dark. She'd heard it on this deck of a sinking cargo ship in a storm so bad the helicopters were grounded when a grizzled Coast Guard veteran said nobody could reach the men trapped below, and she'd found a way. She'd heard it so many times that the words had stopped stinging years ago. They just washed over her now, like rain on a windshield. So she finished her food. She cleaned her tray, and she went to bed early because tomorrow she would need to be sharp, and being sharp mattered more to her than being right. The next morning came before the sun. It came the way it always came at Coronado, with a bullhorn and a cold ocean wind and the sound of Caldwell's boots on the sand. On your feet, formation now. Maya was already there. She was one of the first ones out, standing quietly in the dark, her breath fogging in the chill. She'd learned a long time ago that the people who show up early are the people who get to breathe before the storm. Caldwell walked the line slowly. He liked to walk the line. It let him see who was scared. He stopped in front of Maya. "Whitaker," he said, "you still here?" "Yes, sir." Disappointing. He let the word hang there. Then louder so the whole formation could hear, "Since our new friend earned her spot, she can lead the run this morning. Front of the line, Whitaker. You set the pace, and if you slow down, if you drop back even one step, every single person out here does an extra hour of PT tonight, and they'll know exactly who to thank." It was a cruel move, and everyone knew it. It wasn't about testing Maya. It was about turning the whole team against her. Make her the reason everyone suffers. Break her not with pain, but with hatred. Make 40 exhausted men resent her by the end of the first mile. Caldwell watched her face for the crack he was sure would come. It didn't come. "Yes, sir," Maya said, and she jogged to the front of the line. The run started in the dark and went straight into the surf. Now, running in soft sand is one of the cruelest things a body can do. Every step you take, the ground steals half your energy. The sand grabs your ankles. The cold water numbs your legs. And Caldwell set them on the worst stretch of beach he could find, the loose stuff up past the tide line, where every stride is a small punishment. Maya set a pace that was steady, not showing off, not sprinting to prove a point, just relentless. The kind of pace a person can hold for a very, very long time. The kind of pace that says, "I have done harder things than this, and I am not worried." For the first mile, the men behind her kept up muttering. By the second mile, some of the muttering had stopped because muttering costs air, and air was getting expensive. By the third mile, a strange thing began to happen. Nobody was falling behind because of her. They were falling behind because of themselves. Tyler Voss, who had run his mouth the loudest in the mess hall the night before, was the first to feel it. He'd been so sure this rescue diver would gas out early and hand him a reason to laugh. But she wasn't gassing out. She was floating. Her stride never changed. Not on the hills, not through the water, not up the soft sand. And every time Tyler thought, okay, now she'll crack, now she'll slow down, she just didn't. Somewhere around mile 4, with his lungs on fire and his legs turning to concrete, Tyler had an ugly, unwelcome thought. She's better than me. He hated that thought so much he almost stopped running just to get away from it. At the very back, Marcus Doyle was struggling too, and Marcus struggling was not something the team was used to seeing. The big man carried a lot of muscle, and muscle is heavy in the sand. His face was gray, his breath came in ragged pulls, and then he stumbled. His foot caught a rut, and he went down hard, face first into the wet sand, And he lay there for a second, chest heaving, spent. Now the rule was simple. If you fall, you get up on your own, or you're out. Nobody stops. Nobody helps. That's the way it had always been. Caldwell was somewhere back in his truck watching the line, and if anyone broke formation to help a fallen man, that was a mark against them. So the men in front of Marcus kept running. That was the code. Every man for himself all the way to the finish. Except Maya turned around. From the very front of the line, she turned around and she ran back. The whole formation saw it. Some of them slowed confused because this made no sense. Why would the person leading the run, the person under threat of getting everyone punished, sprint backward down the line, adding distance to her own run to reach a man who had done nothing but talk trash about her the night before she reached Marcus? She didn't say the words about it. She didn't make it a moment. She just got low, got her shoulder under his arm, and said, "Up, come on your feet, Doyle. You've got more than this." Marcus, gasping, looked up at her, and there was confusion all over his face because in his whole life on this team, he had never once seen someone do the thing she was doing. "Leave me," he coughed out. "You'll lose your pace. He'll dock everybody." "Then we all do the extra hour together," Maya said, hauling him up. "Now move." And she ran the last mile with the biggest man on the team half leaning on her, matching her stride, both of them soaked and burning and refusing to stop. They crossed the line together. Dead last, the two of them, which meant by Caldwell's own rule, everybody was doing an extra hour of PT that night. Caldwell stepped out of his truck, and he was almost smiling because this was exactly what he wanted. Now the team would hate her. Now she'd cost them all an evening of pain. Now the resentment would do his job for him. Well, he called out loud enough for everyone. "Looks like your new leader couldn't hold the pace. Whitaker, you just bought this entire team an extra hour tonight. I hope it was worth it stopping to play hero." He waited for the men to turn on her. He waited for the glares, the muttered curses, the wall of hatred that would push her out the door. It didn't come. Instead, there was silence, and then Marcus Doyle still bent over, still gasping, still soaked in sweat, and salt water straightened up, and he looked at Caldwell. "Sir," Marcus said loud enough for everyone, "she didn't cost us anything. She carried me. I fell. She came back. Any punishment coming, it's mine, not hers." Caldwell's smile faded. That was not in the script. He looked at his best men, his hand-picked team, and he saw something in their eyes he did not like. He saw that the wall he had spent an entire morning building had a crack in it, and the crack had come from her. "Fine," Caldwell snapped because he needed to say something. "Everybody's got the extra hour. Consider it a lesson in what happens when you slow down for anybody. Now hit the showers." The men broke formation and shuffled toward the barracks exhausted, and as they went, Danny Reyes fell in beside Maya. Danny the Joker, the one who could find something funny in a house fire. He was quiet for a second, which for Danny was unusual. "You know he's going to come after you harder now," Danny said low so only she could hear. "You made him look bad in front of everybody. He's not going to forget that." "I know," Maya said. "Then why'd you do it? Doyle would have left you in the sand. Yesterday he was calling you a mistake at dinner. I heard him." Maya wiped the salt from her face, and for the first time something that was almost a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Because the point was never to run faster than Doyle," she said. "The point was to make sure Doyle finished." And she walked into the barracks and left Danny Reyes standing in the sand, blinking, trying to figure out what she meant. That night, after the extra hour of PT, after the men lay in their bunks too tired to talk, Ray Ortega couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the run. He kept thinking about the way she turned around. In all his years in every unit he'd ever served with, he had learned to read people fast, because reading people fast was the difference between coming home and not coming home. And everything he'd read on that field today was telling him one thing. That woman was not a mistake. That woman was not somebody's favor. That woman had done this before, not the running. The other thing, the turning around, the going back into danger for a person who didn't deserve it. That was not something you learned in a classroom or bought with a phone call. That was something a person only learned by doing it over and over in real life where the stakes were death. Ray sat up in his bunk in the dark. And across the base in his office, Commander Ethan Caldwell was thinking the same thing, though he would rather have chewed glass than admit it. He sat alone at his desk with a single lamp on, and in front of him was a manila folder. Maya Whitaker's file. Most of it was sealed. He'd been told in no uncertain terms that he did not have the clearance to see the sealed parts, and Caldwell was a man who followed the chain of command even when he hated it. But the unsealed parts were enough to start a fire in the back of his mind. There were gaps, big ones. Years where her history simply stopped. No employer, no address, no record, just a blank space where a life should be. And then on the other side of the blank space, a small note, a commendation. The name on the commendation was blacked out, but the rank was not. The rank was very, very high. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Maya Whitaker had stepped onto his base, a cold and unwelcome question crept into his mind. What if she wasn't the one being tested? He pushed the thought away. He was good at pushing thoughts away. He told himself that gaps in a file meant nothing, that commendations could be exaggerated, that a woman who could run in the sand was still a woman who had never been shot at. But the question didn't fully leave. It just went quiet and waited the way a stone waits at the bottom of a river. The next few days were worse for Maya, exactly as Danny had predicted. Caldwell came after her with everything he had. He made her do the obstacle course 3 times when others did it once. He put her on the bottom of the log during the boat drills, where the weight crushes down hardest. He assigned her the worst watch shifts, the 2 in the morning to 4 in the morning slot that wrecks your sleep and hollows out your body. And through all of it, Maya said the same thing. Yes, sir. She never complained. She never asked why. She never looked for sympathy from the other men, and she never tried to make Caldwell into a villain. She just did the work, and she did it a little bit better than she needed to, and then she went and quietly did the next thing. It was driving Caldwell out of his mind. He was used to breaking people with pressure. Pressure was his whole game. You put enough weight on a person, and eventually they show you what they're made of, and usually what they're made of is complaints and excuses and quitting. But Maya took the pressure and gave back nothing. She was like water. You could push all you wanted, and she just flowed around you and kept going. The turning point came on the 5th day. It was the freezing ocean endurance tests, the one the men called cold water conditioning, which is a polite name for lying in the frigid Pacific until your body starts to shut down. The recruits linked arms in a long line and lay back in the surf while the waves crashed over them, and the instructors timed how long they could hold before the cold beat them. This is where a lot of good people fail. Not the strong ones, not the weak ones. The cold doesn't care about your muscles. The cold gets into your bones, and it whispers to you that you'll die if you don't get out. And for a lot of people, that whisper is too loud to ignore. Maya lay in the water in the line arms, locked with the men on either side of her, and she went to the place in her mind that she went to when things got hard. It was a quiet place. She'd built it a long time ago in situations far worse than this, and she knew the way there by heart. Down the line, one of the younger recruits, a kid named Perez, started to shake. Not the normal shaking, the bad kind. The kind where the body has stopped just being cold and has started to actually fail. His lips were going blue. His eyes were rolling. He was slipping into the early stages of hypothermia, and worst of all, he'd gone quiet, which is the most dangerous sign of all, because a person in real trouble stops asking for help. The instructors were watching, but from the beach, and the waves were high, and in the churning water, it was hard to see who was struggling and who was fine. Maya saw it, though. She'd spent years learning to spot the exact moment a human body crosses from suffering into danger. It was a skill she'd paid for in blood, and she saw it now in Perez, 3 men down the line going still. She had a choice. She could stay in this line and pass her test. That was the smart move. That was the move that kept her score clean and kept Caldwell off her back. Or she could break the line, which meant failing the endurance test, which meant handing Caldwell exactly the failure he'd been hunting for since day one. She didn't hesitate. She unlocked her arms, pushed up through the surf, and got to Perez in 3 seconds. She grabbed him under the arms and hauled him up out of the water up onto the wet sand, and she got him on his side, and she started working on him fast the way a person works who has done this many, many times before. She got his airway clear. She got his blood moving. She talked to him low and steady, calling his name, keeping him with her. The instructors were running now. And on the beach, Commander Caldwell was watching the whole thing through a pair of binoculars, and his jaw was tight. By the time the instructors reached them, Perez was breathing steady, coming back, his color returning all, because a woman who was supposed to be a mistake had known exactly what to do, and had done it without a second's pause. One of the instructors, a hard-faced senior chief named Boone, knelt down next to Perez and checked him over. Then he looked up at Maya, who was already stepping back, already fading into the background, the way she always did, not looking for credit. "Where'd you learn that?" Boone asked. Maya didn't answer right away. "Around," she finally said. Boone stared at her for a long second, and then he stood up and he walked over to Caldwell, and the two men had a short, quiet conversation that Maya couldn't hear. But she could see Caldwell's face, and Caldwell's face was the face of a man whose certainty had just taken a serious hit. "She broke the line," Caldwell said to Boone, though his voice didn't have the fire it usually had. "That's a fail. That's an automatic fail on the endurance test." Boone was quiet for a moment. "Sir," Boone said, "that kid Perez was about 90 seconds from a real bad day. Maybe from not going home at all. She read it before any of us did, and she moved before any of us could. I've been doing this 20 years. He paused. "I've seen combat medics who couldn't have done what she just did." Caldwell didn't say anything. "You want to fail her for it," Boone went on. "That's your call, sir. You're the commander. But I gotta tell you, if I'm ever bleeding out somewhere, that's the person I want crawling toward me." "Not away." And Boone walked off and left Caldwell standing there with his binoculars in his hand, watching Maya Whitaker help a young recruit sit up in the sand. That evening, the story of what happened in the water spread through the base even faster than the story of the run. But it spread differently this time. The first story had been told with mockery. "Did you hear the mistake made everybody run extra?" The second story was told with something else, something quieter, something that sounded almost like awe, even though nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. At their usual table in the mess hall, the men of Bravo 12 were unusually quiet. Tyler Voss, who had talked the biggest game, wasn't talking now. He was pushing food around his tray, and there was a look on his face that hadn't been there 5 days ago. The look of a man whose whole picture of the world had a crack running through it. "She could have passed," Tyler finally said. "She had it. She was holding fine. She could have just stayed in the line and passed the test and shut Cap up for good. And she gave it up. For Perez. Perez, man, she barely knows him." "That's what I'm telling you," Ray said. "That's what I've been telling you since the first day. You keep asking what she is. You're asking the wrong question." "So what's the right question?" Danny asked. Ray leaned back. "The right question," he said slowly, "is what did she survive that makes all this look easy to her? Because I'll tell you what I saw out there today. I saw somebody who's watched people die. You don't move like that. You don't read a body like that unless you've held people while they didn't make it. That's not training. That's scars." The table went silent, and Marcus Doyle, the big man she'd carried through the sand, spoke up in a low voice. "I will her," he said simply. "I don't care what her file says or doesn't say. She came back for me when I'd have left her, and I'm done running my mouth about her." He looked around the table. "Anybody's got a problem with that, we can go outside." Nobody had a problem with it. The wall Caldwell had built was crumbling brick by brick, and he wasn't even there to see it fall. But there was one man who did not know how to give up, and that man was Tyler Voss. Tyler wasn't cruel, not really. He was young and he was proud, and he had spent his whole life being the best at everything he tried, and Maya Whitaker was quietly, calmly taking that away from him without ever once trying to. And that was a hard thing for a proud young man to swallow. So Tyler decided he was going to prove something, not to her, to himself. The next morning during the navigation exercise, when the recruits were sent out with maps and compasses to find their way across miles of rough terrain, Tyler saw his chance. He got to the equipment early, and when nobody was looking, he did something small and mean. He tampered with Maya's compass, just a little, just enough. He adjusted it so it read a few degrees off the kind of error that seems like nothing but that over miles of hard land would send a person walking confidently in exactly the wrong direction. She'd get lost. She'd come in last. And maybe Tyler told himself, maybe that would prove she wasn't perfect after all. Maybe that would put the world back the way it was supposed to be. He felt guilty for about 5 seconds. Then he told himself it was fair. She'd figure it out or she wouldn't. That's what the test was for. The recruits set out into the terrain one at a time, and Maya set out with her tampered compass, not knowing that the one tool she was trusting had been turned into a lie. And here is where Tyler Voss learned something about Maya Whitaker that he would never forget. Because about 40 minutes into the exercise out there in the middle of nowhere, Maya stopped walking. She looked at her compass. She looked at the sun. She looked at the shape of the land, the way the water drained, the way the moss grew on the rocks, the direction the wind had bent the scrubby little trees over the years. And a small frown crossed her face. She'd done thousands of hours of navigation in her life, in places with no roads and no signs and no help coming, in collapsed cities, in dark water, in the mountains. And her whole body was telling her something that her compass was not. The compass says one thing, she thought. Everything else says another. She didn't panic. She didn't curse the equipment. She didn't waste 1 second being angry about it. She simply made a decision that most people would never have the confidence to make. She stopped trusting the compass and she started trusting herself. She navigated the rest of the way by the sun and the land and the water, the old way, the way people found their way for thousands of years before anyone invented a needle in a case. And she didn't just finish the exercise, she finished it first. When Maya walked back into the staging area ahead of every other recruit, calm and unhurried, Tyler Voss was standing there, and the blood drained right out of his face. He knew what he'd done. He knew that compass should have sent her miles off course. And here she was first and not a hair out of place. Maya walked up to him. She held out the compass. "This is off by about 6 degrees, she said quietly so only he could hear. "You might want to have it fixed before somebody uses it who can't tell." And she just handed it to him. No accusation, no fury, no running to Caldwell to report him. She looked him in the eye, and in that look was a message he understood completely. One warrior to another. "I know what you did. I could end you right now, and I'm choosing not to." Tyler took the compass with a shaking hand. "Why?" he croaked. "Why aren't you turning me in?" Maya was quiet for a moment. "Because you're going to be a good one someday," she said. "And good ones make dumb mistakes when they're young and scared of being second. I've made worse." She started to walk away, then stopped and looked back. "But do it again to somebody in the field, Voss, and you'll get them killed. And that one you won't be able to walk back." Then she was gone. And Tyler Voss stood there holding a broken compass, and something inside him broke too, in a good way, the way a wall breaks when it needs to come down. He had tried to expose her, and instead she had exposed him to himself, and then she had let him keep his dignity anyway. He never told anyone what he'd done. But from that day forward, Tyler Voss would have walked through fire for Maya Whitaker. And he never fully understood why, except that he had met for the first time in his life a person who was strong enough to be kind. That night, Commander Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his office again, with the manila folder open in front of him again. And this time he wasn't pushing the thought away. This time he was letting it in. He'd been getting reports all week. The cold water rescues, the navigation run, the way the team's attitude had shifted slow, and then all at once from mockery to something dangerously close to loyalty. He'd built Bravo 12 to be his. And in 1 week, a quiet woman with a sealed file had done something to them he couldn't undo. He picked up his phone. He dialed a number. He almost never dialed the number of a man several ranks above him, a man whose voice he'd only heard a handful of times in his career. The line picked up. "Caldwell," the voice said. "I was wondering when you'd call." Caldwell's throat went dry, because that told him something. It told him this man had known he would call, which meant this whole thing had been watched from higher up than he'd ever imagined. "Sir," Caldwell said carefully, "I'm calling about the recruit, Whitaker." There was a pause on the line, and then the voice said something that made the hair on the back of Caldwell's neck stand up. "No, Commander," the voice said quietly. "You're not calling about the recruit. You're calling because you're starting to suspect that the recruit isn't the one being evaluated here." A pause. "Am I right?" Caldwell didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the man was exactly right. And the fact that he was right, the fact that he had said out loud the very thought Caldwell had been trying to smother for a week, told Caldwell that he had stepped into something far, far bigger than a selection cycle. "Get some sleep, Commander," the voice said. "You're going to need it. This is only the beginning." And the line went dead. Ethan Caldwell sat in the dark for a long time, holding a phone with nobody on the other end, staring at a folder full of blanks, and feeling for the first time in a very long time like the ground under his feet was not as solid as he'd always believed. Down the hall in the barracks, Maya Whitaker slept the deep, easy sleep of a person with nothing to prove. She had no idea that the men who had tried to break her were now quietly ready to follow her. She had no idea that the commander who had humiliated her on day one was now lying awake afraid. And she had no idea that in a few short days, all of them, every last one of them, would be sent into a place called the Dead Zone, where the games would end and the truth about who Maya Whitaker really was would finally begin to come out. But that night, none of that had happened yet. That night, there was only a woman asleep in a bunk and a team learning something they had forgotten a long time ago, and a hard man in a dark office holding a silent phone, finally beginning to understand that the person everyone underestimated might be the only one in the whole place who knew exactly what she was doing. And out past the base, out past the lights and the fences, the Dead Zone waited in the dark, silent, patient, ready. 3 days after that silent phone call, Commander Ethan Caldwell did something he had never done in 22 years of service. He walked into the base commander's office, sat down across from a man he outranked in nothing and respected in everything, and asked to be told the truth. "I need to know what I'm dealing with," Caldwell said. "That recruit, Whitaker. Somebody up the chain is watching this. I got a phone call I didn't ask for from a man whose name I'm not allowed to say out loud. And I've got a team that used to be mine, and now they look at her like she hung the moon. I need to know what's happening on my own base." The base commander, an older man named Halverson with steady gray eyes, studied Caldwell for a long moment. "You already know what's happening, Ethan," Halverson said quietly. "You've known since the cold water test. You just don't want to say it because saying it means admitting you were wrong on day one in front of everybody, and pride is the last thing a man like you ever wants to give up." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, she's not being tested," Halverson said, cutting him off. "Not really. Oh, she has to complete the events. Sure, on paper, it all has to look normal. But nobody up top is worried about whether Maya Whitaker can pass selection. They already know she can. They've seen her do harder things than anything you can throw at her out on that beach." He leaned forward. "The question they're asking, Ethan, the question this whole cycle is really about, is whether your team is good enough to deserve her." The words hit Caldwell like a fist to the chest. He'd spent a week trying to prove Maya didn't belong. And this whole time, higher up than he could see, someone had been quietly measuring whether he and his men belonged. "Who is she?" Caldwell asked, and his voice was lower now, stripped of its usual iron. "That," Halverson said, "I can't tell you. It's above my clearance, too. But I'll tell you this much, because I think you've earned at least this. Before she ever set foot on this base, Maya Whitaker walked into places that swallow people whole, and she walked back out carrying the ones nobody else could reach. She's got a record of pulling human beings out of situations where every rule book said they were already dead." He paused. "And every single time she did it quiet, no cameras. No medals she'd let them pin on her in public. She'd rather be underestimated. It's safer that way in her line of work. So when a loud man in a truck dumps her bag out and calls her a mistake, she doesn't correct him. She just files it away. Because she's been underestimated by better men than you, Ethan, and every one of them ended up owing her their life." Caldwell sat there for a long time after that. When he finally left the office, he was a different man than the one who'd walked in, though it would be a while yet before anyone, including himself, fully understood how much. Out on the training field, the tests kept coming because they had to, but something had changed in the way Caldwell ran them. He was still hard. He was still demanding. But the cruelty had gone out of it. He stopped singling Maya out. He stopped setting traps. And the men noticed because men in a unit notice everything the way a family notices when one person at the table goes quiet. Ray Ortega noticed first the way he noticed most things. "Cap's easing up on her," Ray said one evening low to Marcus and Danny. "You've seen it 3 days now. No more bottom of the log, no more 2 a.m. watch every night." Something changed. "Maybe he finally figured out what the rest of us figured out," Marcus said. "Maybe," Ray said, but there was a thoughtful look on his face. "Or maybe somebody told him something. You don't turn a man like Caldwell around with a good run in the sand. Somebody put a scare in him, and whatever it was big." They didn't know how right Ray was. But the peace, if you could call it that, didn't last, because there was still one test left in the cycle before the final evaluation, and it was the worst one, the one the instructors called the crucible. 48 hours with almost no sleep, almost no food, moving constantly, carrying weight, solving problems, while men with bullhorns did everything in their power to make you quit. It was the test that separated the ones who wanted it from the ones who only thought they did. And it was during the crucible, somewhere in the black middle of the second night, that everything the team thought they knew about Maya Whitaker got turned upside down all over again. The recruits had been awake for over 30 hours. They were carrying rubber boats over their heads, across the sand, stumbling, hallucinating from exhaustion, running on nothing but stubbornness. And in the dark, one of them went down. Not a fake down, a real one. It was Perez again, the same young recruit Maya had pulled from the cold water days before. Except this time it wasn't hypothermia. This time the kid just crumpled mid-step and hit the sand and didn't get up, and the boat came down on the men around him, and there was shouting and confusion, and for a second nobody knew what was happening. Maya was 3 men away. She dropped everything and got to him. And this time when she got her hands on Perez, her whole demeanor changed in a way the men had never seen. The calm was still there, but under it, moving fast, was something razor sharp. She had her fingers on his neck, then his wrist, then she was pulling back his eyelid, and her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He's not just gassed. His heart's racing and his skin's cold and wet. This is going bad fast. She looked up, and her eyes found the nearest instructor. I need the medical kit, and I need a corpsman rolling this second. This is not a crucible washout. This kid is going into shock. Move. The instructor hesitated for half a heartbeat because recruits don't give orders. Recruits don't take command of a situation. That's not how any of this works. Maya didn't wait for him to sort out his feelings about the chain of command. Now, she barked, and there was so much authority in that one word, so much certainty, that the instructor moved without thinking the way a person moves when someone who clearly knows what they're doing tells them to. What happened over the next 10 minutes, the men of Bravo 12 would talk about for the rest of their careers. Maya worked on Perez in the dark and the cold and the chaos, and she did it with a speed and a precision that stopped everyone around her cold. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't hoping. Every move she made was the right move, and the next right move, and the next laid down one after another, with the calm of a person who had done this exact thing in exact conditions like these more times than she could count. She kept the kid's airway open. She managed his temperature. She talked to him the whole time low and steady, keeping him tethered to the world even as his body tried to slip away from it. And when the corpsman finally came sprinting across the sand with the real medical gear, he took one look at what Maya had already done and stopped. Who stabilized him? The corpsman asked. I did, Maya said, already stepping back, already fading the way she always did. The corpsman looked at her, then at Perez, then back at her. You didn't just stabilize him, he said slowly. You caught it. Most people would have called this exhaustion and let him lie there another 5 minutes. 5 more minutes, this kid's in real trouble. He shook his head. Where in the world did a rescue diver learn combat casualty care? Maya didn't answer. She just melted back into the darkness with the other recruits, and the crucible went on because the crucible always goes on. But now every man on that beach had seen it with his own eyes. Not a story secondhand in the mess hall. Their own eyes. They'd watched a woman who was supposed to be a mistake take command of a dying man's body and refuse to let him go. Tyler Voss, who had once broken her compass, was crying. He wouldn't have admitted it, and in the dark nobody could see, but he was. Because he'd been 3 feet away, and when Perez went down, Tyler had frozen. He hadn't known what to do, and Maya had known everything. Later in the gray light before dawn, when the recruits got a rare few minutes to sit and drink water, Marcus Doyle lowered himself down next to Maya in the sand. For a while, neither of them spoke. I said something at that first dinner. Marcus finally said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something heavier. Before I ever met you, I called you a mistake, said they handed you a spot you didn't earn. He stared out at the water. I want you to know I know how wrong I was, and I'm sorry. Maya was quiet for a moment. You weren't wrong to wonder, she said. You bled for that trident. You've got a right to guard it. If you just rolled over and welcomed a stranger with a sealed file, you wouldn't be the kind of man worth having on a team. She almost smiled. It's not the doubting that makes a man small, Doyle. It's what he does after the doubt gets answered. Marcus looked at her. You always talk like that, he asked. Like you're 100 years old. And for the first time since she had arrived on that base, Maya Whitaker laughed. A real laugh, quiet and warm, and it changed her whole face for a second. Only when I'm too tired to hide it, she said. They finished the crucible together, all of them, and when it was over, when the bullhorns finally went silent and the instructors called the end of it, the recruits stood swaying on their feet, hollowed out and half dead, and more alive than they had ever been. And Commander Caldwell walked the line one last time. He stopped in front of Maya. The whole team held its breath because they remembered the first time he'd stopped in front of her in the bag and the word mistake, and they didn't know what he was going to do. Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. "Whitaker," he said. "Yes, sir." "That was good work with Perez." He said it flatly without warmth, but he said it in front of everyone, and every man there understood what it cost a man like Caldwell to say those words out loud. "That kid goes home to his mother because of you. I won't forget that." And then he moved on down the line, and that was all. But it was everything. That night, the men slept like the dead, and in the morning they learned that the selection cycle wasn't quite over. There was one more event, the final evaluation, and when Caldwell gathered them to explain it, the whole tone of the thing was strange, off in a way none of them could put a finger on. "Tomorrow," Caldwell said, "one recruit gets sent into a place we call the Dead Zone, an old training facility up the coast. Decommissioned. It's the hardest survival course on the West Coast, and it's designed to test one thing above all others: whether a person can keep their head alone with no help coming when everything around them is trying to break them." He paused, and there was something in his face the men had never seen before: reluctance. "The recruit going in is Whitaker." A murmur went through the group. "She goes in alone," Caldwell continued. "We monitor from a control room. We do not intervene. She has a set amount of time to make it through, and if she does, she earns her place. If she doesn't—" He didn't finish the sentence, but it was the way he said it that stuck with them. Because Commander Caldwell, the hardest man any of them had ever served under, did not look like a man sending a recruit off to a routine test. He looked like a man who'd been ordered to do something he didn't fully understand and didn't fully trust and couldn't refuse. After he dismissed them, the team gathered in a tight knot, and Ray Ortega said what they were all thinking. "Something's wrong with this," Ray said. "You saw his face. Cap doesn't want to send her in there. He's been ordered to." "Ordered by who?" Danny asked. "Same somebody who's been watching this whole thing from the start," Ray said. "The one who scared him straight 3 days ago. This Dead Zone thing, it's not part of the normal cycle. I've been through 6 selection classes as a cadre. I've never once heard of sending a single recruit into a solo survival course as a final evaluation. Never. This is something else. This is somebody testing something. And I don't think it's her." They fell silent, chewing on that, and none of them liked the taste. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for, one piece of the picture none of them could see, and it was sitting in Commander Caldwell's office that very night in the form of the manila folder that had haunted him since the beginning. Because Caldwell had gotten another phone call. Only this time, the voice on the other end had told him something that made his blood run cold. "Commander," the voice had said, "there's a complication with tomorrow's evaluation. The Dead Zone facility hasn't been used in a long time, longer than it should have been. Some of the automated systems in there, the ones that run the course, they've degraded. We've had a technical team looking at it, and they're telling me some of the hazards may not be operating within safe parameters anymore." Caldwell had gone very still. "Sir," he'd said carefully, "are you telling me the course might not be safe?" "I'm telling you," the voice had said, "that we don't fully know what's in there anymore. And I'm telling you that despite that, the evaluation proceeds. Because if Whitaker is what we believe she is, then a degraded course full of unknowns is exactly the kind of thing she was built to handle. And if she's not what we believe, then better we learn it here than in a place where other people's lives depend on the answer." A pause. "But Commander, keep your team ready, all of them. Because if something in that facility goes truly wrong, they may be the only ones close enough to reach her in time." And the line had gone dead, and Caldwell had sat in the dark, holding another silent phone, understanding now that tomorrow he was going to send a woman into a place that even the people running the test didn't fully understand anymore. He didn't sleep that night. Neither, as it turned out, did Ray Ortega, who lay in his bunk with a bad feeling growing in his gut like a stone. And neither did Tyler Voss, who lay awake thinking about a broken compass and a woman who'd handed it back to him instead of ending his career, and who had made a private promise to himself that if anything ever happened to Maya Whitaker while he stood by, he would never forgive himself as long as he lived. The only person on the whole base who slept soundly that night was Maya herself, because Maya had made peace with places like the dead zone a long, long time ago. In the morning, they drove her up the coast in a plain van, and the team followed in a second vehicle, and Caldwell rode in the front seat of the lead car, saying nothing at all. The facility, when they reached it, was a grim collection of old buildings and towers behind a chain-link fence, the kind of place the government builds and then forgets about, and even in daylight it had a heaviness to it, a stillness, like a held breath. They gathered outside a heavy steel door. Caldwell turned to Maya. For a moment he seemed to be searching for something to say. He was not a man who was good at these moments. He'd spent his whole life keeping people at arm's length, breaking them down instead of building them up, and now standing in front of a recruit he'd tried so hard to destroy, he found he didn't have the words. "Whitaker," he finally said. "Sir." "I don't know exactly what's in there," Caldwell said, and it clearly cost him to admit it. "The people who set this up, they tell me some of the systems are old, unpredictable. It might not run the way it's supposed to." He paused. "I'm telling you that because you deserve to know it. I'm not sending you in there blind if I can help it." Maya studied him for a moment, and something in her expression softened just slightly, because she understood what it meant for this particular man to say those particular words. "Thank you, sir," she said. "That's more than most people would have given me." And then she said something that stopped Caldwell in his tracks. "For what it's worth, Commander," Maya said quietly, "you weren't wrong to be careful with me. A team that lets just anybody in isn't a team worth dying for. You guard this thing like it matters because it does. I'd rather be doubted by men who care about the standard than trusted by men who don't." She glanced at the steel door. "The doubting never bothered me. I've had worse welcomes than a duffel bag in the mud." Caldwell didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded once and stepped back. Maya turned to the team, to Marcus, who owed her, to Tyler, who'd broken her compass and been forgiven, to Danny, the joker gone quiet, to Ray, who'd read her right from the first day. She looked at each of them, and for a second it seemed like she might say something. But she didn't. She just gave them a small nod and turned and stepped through the steel door into the dead zone. And the door closed behind her with a sound like a coffin lid. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then they filed into the control room, a dim space full of old monitors and dust where a couple of technicians were fussing over equipment that clearly hadn't been properly maintained in years. Half the cameras were dead. The ones that worked showed grainy, flickering images of corridors and rooms and towers, the guts of the facility, a maze of old horrors. And somewhere in that maze was Maya alone. "How long's the course?" Marcus asked one of the technicians. "Depends on the person," the tech said, not looking up. "Fast ones do it in a few hours. Most take longer. Some don't finish at all." "And the hazards," Ray pressed. "The commander said some of the systems are degraded. What exactly is in there?" The technician hesitated, and that hesitation told Ray everything. "We're not entirely sure," the tech admitted. "The facility's got automated obstacles, environmental systems. They're supposed to run off the original programming, but the hardware's old. Some of it's throwing errors we've never seen. We're monitoring as best we can, but—" He trailed off. "But you don't actually know what she's walking into," Ray finished flatly. The technician didn't answer, and the men of Bravo 12 stood in that dim control room, staring at flickering monitors, and understood for the first time the full weight of what was happening. They'd spent weeks trying to break this woman, testing her, doubting her, and now they were forced to watch helpless, while she walked alone into a place that even the experts couldn't map. On the monitors, Maya moved. And here's the thing that none of them had expected. None of them. She did not move like a person who was afraid. She did not rush. She did not panic. She stood just inside the entrance for a full minute, doing nothing at all, and Tyler leaned toward the screen and said, "What's she doing? Why isn't she moving?" "She's listening," Ray said softly. "Listening to what?" "The building," Ray said. "She's letting it talk to her. Every place like this has a rhythm, sounds, air moving. She's learning it before she takes a single step. That's not fear, Voss. That's the opposite of fear." And Ray was right. Maya spent that first minute doing what she had done her entire life, in collapsed buildings, in sinking ships and burning towers. She stopped and she let the place reveal itself to her, and she trusted that if she was patient, It would tell her its secrets before it could hurt her. Then she moved, and the men watched transfixed as she began to work her way through the dead zone. The first obstacle came fast. On one of the monitors, a corridor she was walking down suddenly filled with something, some kind of environmental hazard, the old system triggering as she passed through a sensor. In the control room, an alarm chirped and the technicians tensed. "That's not supposed to fire that fast," one of them said. "That's the degraded programming. It's reacting too aggressively." On the monitor, Maya was engulfed. The men surged toward the screens. But when the image cleared, she was already through it, already on the other side, moving low and steady. She'd heard it coming somehow in that half second before it triggered, and she'd been moving before it hit, so that by the time the hazard filled the corridor, she was mostly clear of it. "How did she?" Danny started. "She read it," Marcus breathed. "She read the room and she moved before it went off. That's not luck. She knew." And the strangest thing, the thing that unsettled the men most, was watching Caldwell watch her. Because Commander Caldwell was standing at the front of the control room, arms crossed, and his face had changed. All the hardness, all the anger, all the certainty he'd carried for 22 years, it was draining out of him with every monitor she cleared. And in its place was something the men had never in their lives expected to see on that man's face: wonder. The pure, humbling wonder of a man watching someone do something he'd spent his whole career believing was impossible for a person to do. "I called her a mistake," Caldwell said very quietly, mostly to himself, though Ray was close enough to hear it. "The first day, in front of everybody, I dumped her bag in the mud and I called her a mistake." Ray didn't say anything. "She's better than all of us," Caldwell went on in that same hollow, quiet voice. "She's better than anyone I've ever trained, and I tried to break her." He shook his head slowly. "What kind of man does that make me, Ortega? What kind of man looks at greatness and tries to destroy it because it didn't come wrapped the way he expected?" Ray considered the question honestly, the way he considered everything. "The kind of man," Ray said finally, "who can still change, if he's willing to." Caldwell looked at him, and on the monitors, Maya kept going deeper into the dead zone, clearing obstacle after obstacle, and every one she cleared drove the point deeper into every man in that room. But then something happened that wiped the wonder off every face and replaced it with pure, cold fear. One of the monitors, the one showing a section of the facility Maya was approaching, suddenly went black. Then another, then a third. A whole bank of screens died at once, and the technicians started cursing and hammering at their equipment. "What just happened?" Caldwell demanded, his commander's voice snapping back into place. "Where are those cameras?" "We lost the whole east section," a technician said, panic climbing into his voice. "Power fault. The old wiring, we've got no eyes in there." And that's exactly where she's headed. "Get them back," Caldwell ordered. "I'm trying, sir, but this is 30-year-old hardware. I can't just get them back." On the last working monitor before the dead zone, within the dead zone, they watched Maya approach the edge of the section they could no longer see. She was walking toward a doorway, and beyond that doorway was blackness. No camera, no monitoring, nothing. She would step through it and disappear from their sight entirely into a part of a degraded, malfunctioning facility that not even the people running the test could observe. "Maya, no," Tyler whispered at the screen uselessly because she couldn't hear him. "Don't go in there. Wait, just wait." But of course she couldn't wait. She didn't know the cameras were down. She didn't know she was about to vanish. To her, it was just another doorway, another obstacle, and she moved toward it with the same calm patience she'd shown the entire time. She reached the threshold. She paused the way she always paused, listening. And then Maya Whitaker stepped through the doorway into the blacked-out section of the dead zone, and every camera lost her, and the last working monitor showed only the empty doorway she disappeared into, and the control room went dead silent. "Where is she?" Caldwell said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand aimed at the universe. "Where is she? Get me eyes. Get me anything." "We've got nothing, sir," the technician said, his voice tight with fear. "The whole east wing is dark. We can't see her. We can't hear her. We've got no telemetry, no comms. She's completely on her own in there. And with the systems degrading the way they are..." He swallowed. "Sir, if a hazard fires wrong in there, if something goes really wrong, we won't even know until she either walks out the other side or..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The men of Bravo 12 stood in that dim control room, staring at a black monitor in an empty doorway, And every single one of them felt the exact thing Maya Whitaker had felt on her very first day when a hard man dumped her bag in the mud and called her a mistake in front of the world. They felt helpless. They felt small. They felt the terrible, sickening fear of watching something happen that you cannot stop and cannot fix and cannot control. And Marcus Doyle, the big man she'd carried through the sand, the man who owed her his dignity, said the thing that was in all of their hearts, his voice cracking with an emotion none of them had ever heard from him before. "We have to go in after her." Caldwell turned. "We can't," he said, but there was agony in it. "My orders are explicit, no intervention. If we go in there, we compromise the evaluation, and worse, we could walk into the same hazards blind and end up needing rescue ourselves. That's 4 more people lost in the dark instead of 1. So we just stand here," Marcus's voice rose. "We just stand here and watch a black screen and hope after everything she did, she went back for me in the sand. She caught Perez when the rest of us froze. And now we just watch." "Doyle, that's not who we are," Marcus roared, and the whole room went still. "Or it's not who we're supposed to be. She spent 3 weeks showing us what a real operator does. A real operator goes back. A real operator doesn't leave people in the dark. And now the one time it counts, the one time it's her in the dark, we're going to prove we didn't learn a single thing she tried to teach us." The words hung in the air. And Commander Ethan Caldwell, the man who had built this team, the man who had tried to break the very woman they were now desperate to save, stood there torn between his orders and his conscience, between the chain of command and the sick certainty in his gut that if he did nothing, he would spend the rest of his life haunted by a black monitor and an empty doorway. He looked at his men. He looked at the dead screens. And somewhere deep in that degraded, blacked-out facility, in a place where no camera could see and no voice could reach Maya, Whitaker was completely, utterly alone, walking through the dark toward whatever the dead zone had waiting for her. Inside the dark, Maya Whitaker did not know she had vanished from the world. She only knew that the cameras she'd spotted mounted in the corners of the earlier quarters had stopped appearing, and that the air had changed, gone staler and heavier, the way air does in a space that's been sealed and forgotten. And she knew the way she always knew that this was the part of any dangerous place where people got hurt. Not at the beginning when everyone is sharp and careful. In the middle. In the dark. When the mind gets tired and starts wanting to hurry. So Maya slowed down. She'd learned that lesson in a flooded subway tunnel years ago, holding a flashlight in her teeth, moving toward the sound of a child crying, feeling the water rise around her waist. The lesson was simple, and it had kept her alive more times than she could count. When you can't see, slow down. When you're scared, slow down. When every instinct in your body is screaming at you to rush, that is the exact moment you slow down, because rushing in the dark is how you die. She put her hand out and found a wall, and she began to move along it, one careful step at a time, reading the space through her fingertips and her ears and the soles of her feet. And that patience saved her life within the first 2 minutes, because there was a hole in the floor. Not a small one. A gap where the old flooring had collapsed or been designed to give way, a black drop into who knew what, and a person moving fast in the dark would have walked right into it and been gone. But Maya wasn't moving fast. Her lead foot came down and felt the edge, felt the floor simply stop existing, and she froze, weight back, and crouched down and reached out into the emptiness with her hand and found nothing but air. She knelt there for a moment at the edge of the pit. If I'd been running, she thought I'd be at the bottom of that right now with a broken leg and no one coming. Then she felt her way carefully around the edge of the gap, hugging the wall, testing every inch of floor before she trusted it with her weight, and she made it past. Back in the control room, the men had no idea any of this was happening. They only had the black monitors in the empty doorway and the sick, helpless, waiting. "How long's she been dark?" Marcus asked for the 3rd time. 6 minutes, Danny said, staring at a dead watch face like it might change something. 6 minutes. 6 minutes doesn't sound like a long time. But when you're standing in a dim room, watching a black screen, unable to see or hear or help someone, you've come to care about 6 minutes as an eternity. 6 minutes is long enough to imagine 1,000 terrible things. "We should be in there," Marcus said again. And Caldwell didn't answer, because Caldwell was fighting the same war inside himself and losing a little more with every passing second. Ray Ortega hadn't said much. He was standing very close to the last working monitor, the one showing the empty doorway, and he was thinking hard the way he did. And finally he spoke. "She's fine," Ray said. The others looked at him. "You don't know that," Tyler said, his voice tight. "You can't know that. We can't see her." "I know that," Ray said, "because I've been watching her for 3 weeks, and I figured something out about Maya Whitaker that I think the rest of you are still missing." He turned to face them. "The dark isn't her enemy. The dark is where she's best. Think about it. The cold water, she was calm. The navigation, she threw away the compass and trusted herself. Every single time the situation got worse, she got better. You know why?" Nobody answered. "Because wherever she came from, whatever those blacked out years in her file were, Ray said she spent them in the dark, in the bad places, in the situations where everything's gone wrong and there's no help coming, and it's just you and your training and your nerve. That's her home. That's where she lives." He looked back at the empty doorway on the monitor. "We're standing here scared for her. But I promise you, she's not scared. She's exactly where she knows how to be." And deep in the dead zone in the pitch black, Ray Ortega was proven right. Because Maya had found something. Feeling her way along the wall past the pit, she'd come to a heavy door, and behind that door faintly she could hear something, a mechanical sound, a cycling, grinding rhythm, old machinery running on its own with no one to tell it to stop. And she understood with the clarity that came to her in these moments that this was one of the facility's automated hazards still running after all these years. Degraded and dangerous and utterly indifferent to whether a human being lived or died in front of it. A person in a hurry would have opened that door and walked into whatever was cycling on the other side. Maya put her ear to the door and listened. She listened for a long time, long enough to learn the rhythm of the thing, the pattern of it, the pauses. She counted. She waited. She let the machine teach her its own timing, the way she'd once let a collapsing building teach her when the next section would fall, so she'd know exactly when to move and when to hold. And when she understood the rhythm, when she was certain of it, she opened the door and moved through the hazard in the pauses between its cycles, timing each step to the machine's own breathing, and she passed through a thing that had been built to hurt people without it ever touching her at all. She came out the other side into a slightly lighter space where a little gray light leaked in from somewhere high above, and for the first time since the darkness, she could see her own hands again. And that was when the dead zone showed her its cruelest trick. Because as Maya stepped into that dim gray light, the floor beneath her shifted. Not the way the floor at the pit had simply ended. This was different. This was a section of flooring that had been designed to move to tilt to test balance and nerve, and the degraded old machinery running it had gone wrong. And instead of tilting slowly the way it was designed to, it dropped hard and fast and violent, the whole section of floor lurching out from under her. Maya went down. She slid fast toward an edge, toward another drop, and this one she could see. And it was a long way down onto old concrete, the kind of fall that ends a person, and there was nothing to grab the walls smooth and the floor pitching under her like the deck of a ship in a storm. Anyone else would have died in that moment. Anyone else would have grabbed uselessly at the smooth walls, or frozen, or screamed and slid off the edge into the drop. But Maya Whitaker had spent her entire adult life falling and not dying. In the half second she had, her body did what it had been trained by 100 real disasters to do. She didn't fight the slide. She went with it, turning her body, and at the last possible instant, as she reached the edge, she threw out one arm and caught the lip of it, the ragged edge of the broken floor, and her whole weight came down on 4 fingers, and she hung there in the gray light over a drop that would have killed her, holding on by a hand's width of old concrete. Her shoulder screamed, her fingers burned, and Maya did not panic. She hung there breathing, feeling the pain, letting it be there, without letting it own her, and she looked down at the drop below her feet, and she looked up at the edge she was holding, and she made a plan calmly, the way she'd made plans, hanging off the sides of buildings and ships and cliffs before. Then with a strength that came from somewhere most people never have to find, she began to pull herself up. Back in the control room, they still couldn't see any of it. They only had the black monitors. But something had changed among the technicians, a flurry of activity, and Caldwell was on them instantly. "What? What is it? Talk to me." "We got a telemetry spike, sir," a technician said, hands flying over the console. One of the sensors in the east wing kicked back online for a second. "There's a floor system in there, an old tilt mechanism, and it just registered a full failure cycle. Hard drop. Not the slow tilt it's supposed to do. It dropped." The blood drained out of Caldwell's face. Dropped, he repeated, with her on it. We don't know, sir. We can't see. But if she was on that section when it failed, that's it, Marcus said, and he was already moving toward the door. That's it. I'm done. I'm not standing here while she falls to her death in the dark. Orders or no orders? Doyle, stand down, Caldwell barked. Court-martial me, Marcus shouted back, wheeling around. Court-martial me, I don't care. You think I care about my career more than her life after what she did? She carried me, Cap. She carried me a mile through the sand when everyone else ran past. I'm not leaving her in the dark. I'm not. And for one terrible moment, the whole control room hung on the edge of chaos. Marcus at the door. Caldwell caught between his oath and his heart, the men frozen, the technicians white-faced. And then Ray Ortega's voice cut through all of it, low and steady and certain. Look! Everyone turned. On the last working monitor in the empty doorway they'd been staring at for what felt like a lifetime, something moved. A shape. A figure emerging from the darkness of the blacked-out section, walking back into the range of the one camera that still worked. It was Maya. She was walking, on her own, upright. Her shoulder was held a little stiff, and there was dust and grime all over her, and even on the grainy old monitor, they could see she'd been through something. But she was walking out of the dark back into the light alive. The control room erupted. Marcus let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a scream and sagged against the doorframe. Tyler had both hands pressed over his mouth. Danny was saying yes, yes, yes under his breath like a prayer. And Caldwell hard controlled. Commander Caldwell closed his eyes for a long moment and let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 10 minutes. But Ray Ortega didn't celebrate. Ray was watching the monitor closely and his brow was furrowed, and he said, Something's wrong. What are you talking about? Danny said. She's alive. She's up. She made it through the dark part. Look at how she's holding that shoulder, Ray said. And look where she's standing. She stopped. She's not moving forward. She's just standing there in the doorway looking at something ahead of her. He leaned closer to the screen. The course isn't over. There's more ahead of her. And whatever it is, she stopped to study it, which means it's bad. They all leaned in, and Ray was right. Maya stood in the doorway on the monitor, and she was looking ahead at the final section of the dead zone, the last obstacle between her and the exit. And even on the grainy old camera, they could see her doing the thing she always did. Standing still, listening, reading, learning the shape of the danger before she stepped into it. What's ahead of her? Caldwell demanded of the technicians. That section, can you see it? What's the last obstacle? A technician pulled up an old schematic, faded and half-corrupted, and studied it. It's the final gauntlet, sir, he said slowly. The exit sequence. It's supposed to be the hardest part of the whole course. Multiple hazards all running at once, time to overlap. You're supposed to move through it fast, reading all of them at the same time, finding the one path through where all the timing lines up. He looked up, and his face was grim. And sir, with the systems degraded the way they are, the timing won't be right. The hazards will be firing wrong. Overlapping in ways they're not supposed to. There might not even be a clean path through anymore. It might be impossible, Ray finished quietly. The word landed in the room like a stone. On the monitor, Maya stood at the entrance to a final gauntlet that might have no safe path through it alone, injured with no help coming, and the men who had spent 3 weeks trying to break her now stood helpless behind dead screens, watching, praying, unable to do a single thing but wait. And then Maya moved. She stepped forward out of the doorway toward the gauntlet, and the last camera lost her again as she passed out of its narrow view into the final stretch of the dead zone. No, Tyler breathed. No, we lost her again. We can't see. Get her back. Get the camera back. There's no camera in there, the technician said. That section never had working cameras even before the power fault. She's dark again. We won't see her until she reaches the exit. If she reaches the exit, Danny said quietly and immediately looked like he wished he hadn't. Nobody answered him because there was nothing to say. They stood in the dim control room, all of them, and they watched a monitor showing an empty doorway, and beyond that doorway, out of sight, Maya Whitaker walked alone into a gauntlet of malfunctioning hazards that might have no way through, and there was not one single thing any of them could do about it. Time stretched. A minute passed, then 2, then 3. How long does the gauntlet take? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. For a normal run, a couple minutes if you're fast and you read it right, the technician said. But like this degraded no clean path, I don't know. I don't know how long or if he trailed off. 4 minutes. 5. And with every minute that passed, the fear in the room grew heavier because 5 minutes in a 2-minute gauntlet meant something had gone wrong, meant she was pinned down somewhere in there, meant the hazards were firing wrong, and she couldn't find a path, and she was stuck alone in the dark waiting for a gap that might never come. Caldwell couldn't take it anymore. That's enough, he said, and his voice had changed. The commander was gone. In his place was just a man. That's enough. I don't care about the orders. I don't care about the evaluation. I'm not going to stand here and let her die in there because I was too much of a coward to break a rule. He turned to his team. Doyle, Ortega, Voss, Reyes, we're going in. We find her, we get her out, and whatever comes down on us afterward, it comes down on me. Move. And for the first time since the dead zone had swallowed Maya Whitaker, the men of Bravo 12 moved as one toward the door, toward the dark, toward their teammate ready to walk into the unknown to bring her home. But they never got the chance, because at that exact moment, a sound cut through the control room, a heavy grinding mechanical sound, the sound of the steel exit door of the dead zone, the final door, the one on the far side of the whole course beginning to open. Everyone froze. Every head turned toward the one monitor that showed the exit. A camera pointed at the outside of that final steel door, and they watched hearts in their throats as the ancient mechanism ground and shuddered, and the great door slowly began to rise. Is that? Tyler couldn't finish. The exit, the technician whispered. The exit door only opens when someone completes the course. It only opens from the inside, from the control panel at the very end. Someone reached the end. Someone triggered it. The door rose higher, and in the widening gap beneath it, in the gray outside light, a figure appeared. Maya Whitaker walked out of the dead zone. She walked out slowly, and she walked out alone, and she walked out on her own 2 feet. Her shoulder was held stiff. She was covered head to toe in dust and grime. There was a thin line of blood dried along one temple. She looked like someone who had been to the edge of something terrible and come back. But she was calm. She had the same calm expression she'd worn walking in. The same calm she'd worn when Caldwell dumped her bag in the mud on the first day. The same calm she'd worn in the cold water and on the navigation run and kneeling over Perez in the dark. She walked out of the most dangerous survival course on the West Coast, out of a gauntlet of malfunctioning hazards that might have had no safe path through it, and she looked like a person coming back from a long, hard walk. No panic, no celebration, no triumph. Just calm breathing and steady steps and eyes that had seen far worse than this and would see worse again. The control room emptied in a stampede. The men of Bravo 12 poured out of that dim room and out into the gray light, and they reached her as she cleared the door. And for a moment, nobody knew what to do because how do you greet someone who's just walked out of a place you were certain had killed her? It was Marcus who reached her first. The big man stopped in front of her, and his face was working with emotion, and he opened his mouth and closed it, and finally he just said thickly, "We thought we lost you. The cameras went dark. We couldn't see. We thought," his voice broke, "we were coming in after you. All of us, we were about to come in." Maya looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "I know you were," she said quietly. "I could tell 3 weeks ago that you were the kind of men who'd come. That's why I stayed." She looked around at all of them, at Marcus and Ray and Tyler and Danny, at their frightened, relieved, wondering faces. A team that would leave someone in the dark isn't worth much, but a team that would break every rule to go back for a person they barely know. She almost smiled. That's the only kind of team worth having. Tyler pushed forward, and there were tears standing in his eyes, and he said, How did you do it, the gauntlet? They said the timing was all wrong. They said there might not even be a path through. How did you get through it?" Maya was quiet for a moment. "There was a path," she said simply. "There's always a path. You just have to stop panicking long enough to see it." She glanced back at the dark doorways she'd come out of. The machines were firing wrong, that's true. Overlapping. No clean way through if you tried to move fast. So I didn't move fast. I stood there and I watched it and I let it run through its whole cycle 3 times until I understood it. And then in one place for about 2 seconds, everything lined up. All the hazards firing in a way that left one narrow gap. And I took it. You waited, Ray said, understanding dawning on his face. Everyone else would have tried to force their way through fast and gotten caught. You waited for the machine to show you the way. The environment always shows you the way. Maya said, if you're patient enough to let it, fighting it is how you die. Studying it is how you live. That's the whole secret. That's the only secret. She looked at them and her voice was gentle. It was never about being stronger than the dead zone. You can't be stronger than a place like that. It'll always be bigger than you. It was about being humble enough to learn from it. And Commander Ethan Caldwell, who had come out of the control room last, who had stood at the back watching his men surround the woman he tried to destroy, finally stepped forward. The men made way for him. He stood in front of Maya, and for a long moment the two of them just looked at each other. The hard commander and the quiet recruit and everything that had passed between them hung in the air. The duffel bag in the mud, the word mistake, the impossible run, the cold water, the navigation. 3 weeks of him trying to break her and her refusing to break, and now this. Whitaker, Caldwell said, and his voice was not steady. Sir, I owe you an apology, Caldwell said. Not the small kind, the real kind. He swallowed. On your first day, I dumped your gear in the mud, and I called you a mistake in front of 40 men. I spent 3 weeks trying to prove you didn't belong. And every single day you proved me wrong, and every single day, instead of admitting it, I dug in harder. He shook his head slowly. I've been doing this 22 years. I built this team. I thought I knew everything there was to know about what makes an operator. And then you walked onto my base and you showed me I'd forgotten the most important thing of all. What's that, sir? Maya asked quietly. Caldwell looked at her. That the strongest person in the room, he said, is usually the one who has nothing to prove. And there in the gray light outside the dead zone, Commander Ethan Caldwell did something no man on Bravo 12 had ever seen him do in all their years serving under him. He came to attention and he saluted a recruit. Maya held his gaze for a moment, and then slowly she returned the salute. The men stood in silence, understanding that they were watching something rare and important. The moment a proud man laid his pride down, the moment a hard man let himself be humbled by something greater than himself. But even then, even in that moment of peace and respect, the full truth of who Maya Whitaker was had not yet come out. The men still thought this was the end of it. They thought she'd passed the test, that the dead zone was the last hurdle, that now she'd simply join the team and things would settle into something normal. They had no idea. They had no idea that the real reason Maya Whitaker had been sent to that base had nothing to do with whether she could pass selection. They had no idea about the blacked out years and the sealed operations, and the men whose names were rarely spoken who had signed the commendations in her file. They had no idea that within days, all of them, every last one of them, would find themselves in a real crisis, a true emergency with real lives on the line, and that the woman they tried to break would be the only thing standing between them and disaster. But that was still to come. For now, there was only the gray light and the open door of the dead zone behind her, and a team that had finally learned to see her, and a hard man's salute, and Maya Whitaker standing calm and quiet and steady, the same as she'd been on the very first day, carrying inside her a truth that none of them had begun to guess. The truth came for them 4 days later, and it came fast the way real trouble always does. They were back at Coronado, and things had indeed settled into something new. Maya had earned her place, and the men treated her like it, and even Caldwell had changed, gone quieter and more thoughtful, a man carrying a lesson he was still learning how to hold. For 4 days, there had been an easy peace on that base, the kind that comes after a storm passes. And then the call came. It came in the middle of the afternoon, and it came through channels that made Caldwell's stomach tighten the moment he heard which channels they were. A real-world mission, an immediate tasking, not a drill, not a training exercise, the genuine article. He gathered the team in the briefing room, and the moment they saw his face, the easy peace of the last 4 days evaporated. Listen up, Caldwell said. This is real. We've got a hostage situation. 3 American aid workers taken by an armed group at a compound near the coast about 90 minutes out. Intel says the situation's deteriorating fast. Command wants an extraction, and they want it tonight before it gets any worse. He paused. We're the closest qualified team. We're up. The room went electric the way a room full of operators goes electric when the real thing finally arrives. This was what they trained for. This was what all the sand and the cold water and the pain had been building toward. Whitaker's not combat qualified for this, Tyler said. And it wasn't cruelty, it was just fact, the kind of fact that had to be said. She just finished selection. She's not signed off for a live op. I know, Caldwell said. She stays on the support element. Comms and medical stage back from the objective. She does not go inside the wire. He looked at Maya. Understood. Understood, sir, Maya said. And here's the thing that would come to haunt every man in that room in the hours ahead. They were relieved. They were relieved she was staying back. Because in their minds, even after everything they'd seen, some part of them still thought of her as the recruit who needed protecting. They'd watched her clear the dead zone. They'd watched her save Perez twice. And still, when the real thing came, they slotted her into the safe role and felt good about it. Because that's how the human mind works. It clings to its old pictures long after those pictures have been proven false. They had no idea that the one person on that team most qualified for what was about to happen was the person they just benched. They geared up. They loaded out. And they rolled toward the coast in the fading light, 4 combat-hardened SEALs and 1 recruit on the support element toward a compound where 3 innocent people were waiting to be saved. The plan was solid. It was Caldwell's plan, and Caldwell was good, and on paper it worked. Approach under cover of dark. Breach the compound at 2 points. Neutralize the guards. Secure the hostages. Exfil to a pickup point where a vehicle would be waiting. 90 seconds of violence in and out the way it was supposed to go. But real missions are not paper. And this one went wrong almost from the first minute. The first thing that went wrong was the intel. The intel said a handful of lightly armed men. The reality, as the team discovered the moment they got eyes on the compound, was something else entirely. There were far more of them than the briefing had said. They were better armed than the briefing had said. And they were alert, moving with purpose as if they'd known someone might be coming. Cap, Ray whispered over the comms from his position. This is not what we were briefed. Counts way high, and they're switched on. This is wrong. Caldwell felt it too, that cold prickle at the base of the neck that every experienced operator learns to trust the feeling that says, turn around, this is a trap. But there were 3 American lives inside that compound, and the window was closing, and if they pulled back now, those 3 people might not survive the night. We push, Caldwell decided. Careful and quiet, we adapt. Go. They went, and for about 2 minutes it worked. They breached. They moved. They handled the first guards clean and quiet. They got to the building where the hostages were held. And for 2 minutes, Caldwell let himself believe they'd pull it off after all. Then everything came apart at once. It started with the equipment. A breach charge that should have blown a door clean off its hinges, misfired, half-detonated, and the noise of it, muffled but unmistakable, rolled across the compound like a shout in a church. And in an instant, the whole place woke up. We're blown, Ray's voice snapped over the comms. We are blown, they're moving, And then the gunfire started. What followed was the thing that no plan survives. The thing they train you for, but can never fully prepare you for the descent of a controlled operation into pure chaos. The compound erupted. The armed men, far more numerous than they should have been, poured out and opened up, and suddenly the 4 men of Bravo 12 were pinned down in a place they didn't know. Outnumbered, their careful plan turned to smoke. And then the second disaster hit. The comms went down. Not all at once, but piece by piece, the team's radios crackling and dropping, cutting out so that within a minute, Caldwell couldn't reach half his men, and none of them could reach each other cleanly. Whether it was jamming or the same equipment and failures that had plagued them, or just the chaos of the fight, it didn't matter. The result was the same. A team is only a team when it can talk. And now they couldn't. They were scattered, pinned, cut off from each other and from the plan. And then the third disaster, the worst one. Marcus Doyle went down. The big man had pushed forward to try to reach the hostage building, and a burst caught him, and he went down hard behind a low wall and over the one channel that still crackled intermittently. The others heard him, heard the pain in his voice, heard him say he was hit bad in the leg, couldn't move, pinned down with fire coming in and no way back. Doyle's down. Danny's voice cracked over the failing comms. Doyle's hit. He's hit. He can't move. We gotta. And then his channel died too. Back at the support element, staged a safe distance from the compound, Maya Whitaker heard all of it. She heard the misfire. She heard the gunfire erupt. She heard the comms falling apart, the panic climbing into the voices of men she'd watched be so calm and confident just hours before. She heard Ray say they were blown. She heard Danny say Doyle was down. And then she heard the worst thing of all. She heard silence. The comms died almost completely, leaving only static. And in that static, Maya understood exactly what was happening because she had been in this exact place before more times than she could count. A team overwhelmed. A plan collapsed. Men who were brave and skilled and hopelessly outmatched by a situation that had gone wrong in every possible way at once. Chaos, fear, uncertainty. The very things they tried so hard to inflict on her in the dead zone now visited upon them for real, with real bullets and real blood and a real man bleeding out behind a wall. The support element leader, an officer named Pratt, was shouting into the dead comms trying to raise the team, getting nothing. "We have to call it," Pratt was saying, his voice tight with fear. "We've lost contact, we've lost the element that we call higher, and we wait for a QRF. That's the protocol. We can't just..." "There's no time for a QRF, Noron," Maya said. Pratt turned to her. "Whitaker, you're not even your support. You're not cleared for. Doyle is bleeding out right now," Maya said, and her voice was calm, but it was the calm of a blade. "You heard him. Leg wound pin, can't move. If that's the femoral, he's got minutes. Not the 20 or 30 it takes for a quick reaction force to spin up and get here. Minutes. And the other 3 are scattered and cut off, and they can't even talk to each other." She was already moving as she spoke, already stripping down to what she needed, already checking the medical kit. "I'm going in." "You can't," Pratt said. "You're not combat qualified. You'll get yourself killed, and then it's 5 casualties instead of..." Maya stopped and she looked at him, and something in her eyes made the words die in his throat. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "I've done this before. More times than you know. I know you don't understand that because you don't know my history. Almost nobody does. But I'm asking you to trust me for the next 10 minutes because in the next 10 minutes, I can either be arguing with you or I can be saving those men's lives. Not both." She held his gaze. "Which do you want?" "What?" And Lieutenant Pratt, staring into the eyes of a woman who was supposed to be a green recruit and seeing something there that he had no name for, something ancient and certain and utterly without fear, made the only choice a decent man could make. He stepped aside. "Go," he said, and Maya Whitaker went into the dark toward the sound of the guns, toward the men who had tried to break her, to save every last one of them. What happened over the next 15 minutes, the men of Bravo 12 would never fully be able to explain. Not to command, not to the review board, not even to each other in the quiet years afterward. Because it did not look like anything any of them had ever seen. It did not look like a recruit stumbling into a firefight. It looked like something else entirely. It looked like a person who was completely terrifyingly at home in the middle of chaos. Maya did not run in shooting. That was the first thing. She didn't announce herself. She moved through the edges of the compound, the way she'd moved through the dead zone, low and quiet, and reading everything using the same patience that had carried her through every impossible thing she'd ever survived. She let the chaos be her cover. While the armed men were focused outward, hunting the pinned-down SEALs, firing at muzzle flashes, a single quiet figure slipped through the gaps between them unseen. She reached Marcus first. The big man was behind the low wall, and he was in a bad way, his legs soaked dark, his face gray, fire chipping the wall above his head. He'd gotten a hand on his own wound and was pressing, but he was fading, and he'd made his peace with it the way men do, gone quiet and still, and that quiet was the most dangerous sign of all. And then out of the chaos, a hand was on him, and a voice was in his ear, low and steady and calm, a voice he knew. "Doyle, Doyle, look at me. I've got you." Marcus's eyes came open, and he saw her face, and for a second he thought he was already gone, that this was the mind playing its last kind trick. "Maya," he croaked, "you're not your support. You can't be here." "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Maya said, and her hands were already working fast and sure, finding the wound, getting a tourniquet high on his leg, cranking it down, stopping the bleed that was killing him. "Now stay with me, Doyle. You carried a lot of weight the day I met you. Now it's my turn to carry yours. She got the bleeding stopped. She got him stable. And then in a display of raw strength that Marcus would talk about for the rest of his life, this woman got the biggest man on the team up and moving, taking his weight, dragging him back out of the kill zone to cover out of the line of fire to a place where he could survive. The others, Marcus gasped. Ray Voss, Danny, they're scattered. They can't reach each other. The comms. I know, Maya said. I heard. Stay here. Keep pressure below the tourniquet if it starts to loosen. I'm going back for them. Maya, Marcus grabbed her arm. There's too many. You can't fight your way through that. There's too many of them. Maya looked at him and she almost smiled. Who said anything about fighting, she said, and she was gone again back into the chaos. Here is the thing that the men would come to understand only much later when they had time to piece it all together. Maya did not save them by being a better shooter than the enemy. She did not save them by force. She saved them the way she'd cleared the dead zone, the way she'd navigated without a compass, the way she'd survived every disaster in her blacked-out years. She saved them by understanding the chaos better than anyone else in it, and by using that understanding to move through it like water. She found Ray Ortega pinned behind a vehicle, low on ammunition, cut off, certain he was about to be overrun. And out of nowhere, a voice was beside him. Ortega, it's Whitaker. Ray nearly jumped out of his skin. Whitaker, how in the you're not supposed to be? Doyle's stable he's in covered to the south, Maya said fast. Here's what's happening. They think they've got you all pinned and scattered, and they're right, but they don't know how many of you there are or where exactly, and that's your advantage, not theirs. The comms are down, so you're all fighting alone, and alone you lose. But I can move between all of you. I'm going to link you back up. I'm your comms now. I'm your net. Follow my lead and we get everyone out. And that's exactly what she did. She became the thread that stitched the scattered team back together. Moving through the chaos unseen, she went from man to man, carrying information, coordinating, telling each of them where the others were, where the enemy was thin, where the path out lay. She turned 4 isolated men fighting hopeless individual battles back into a team, and she did it without a radio on foot through the middle of a firefight, using nothing but her own body and her own nerve, and a lifetime of experience none of them had known she had. She reached Taylor Voss, who was in the worst spot of all, nearly surrounded out of good options, the young man who'd once broken her compass, now facing the end of everything. Voss, he spun weapon up and just barely didn't fire, and then he saw her face and his own crumpled with a desperate, disbelieving relief. Maya, oh my God, Maya, I'm surrounded. I can't. There's no way out. I've been trying to find a gap, and there isn't one. There's always a gap, Maya said, dropping down beside him. Remember I told you that at the dead zone? There's always a path. You just have to stop panicking long enough to see it. She pointed. That corner there. In about 40 seconds, when they shift to cover Ortega's move, that corner goes quiet for maybe 3 seconds. That's your gap. That's your 2 seconds where everything lines up. When I tell you, you move, and you don't stop, and you don't look back, and I'll be right behind you. Tyler stared at her. You waited for the machine to show you the way, he said, remembering his voice shaking. At the dead zone, you said the environment always shows you the way if you're patient enough. Now you're learning, Maya said. Get ready. And she watched the chaos the way she watched everything, reading the flow of the fight, waiting for the pattern to reveal itself, and at the exact right instant, in the precise moment when the enemy's attention shifted and that corner fell quiet, she said, now, and Tyler Voss moved, and the gap was there exactly where she'd said it would be, and he made it through. One by one, she brought them out. She linked them up, and she guided them, and she found the paths through the chaos that none of them could see, and she funneled all 4 of them, plus the 3 hostages they'd fought their way to, back toward the exfil point where the vehicle waited. She was everywhere and nowhere, moving through a battlefield like it was her native country. And by the time the enemy fully understood what was happening, that some single unseen force was pulling their trapped prey out from between their fingers, it was already too late. The last one out was Caldwell himself. The commander had held the rear, covering his men's withdrawal, and now he was the most exposed, the enemy closing in, and he knew with a soldier's cold clarity that he might not make it out. He'd made his peace with it. A commander's job is to be the last one out, and sometimes the last one out doesn't come out at all. And then she was there. Maya appearing beside him in the smoke and the noise calm as still water in the middle of hell. "Sir, time to go." Caldwell stared at her. This woman, this recruit he dumped in the mud and called a mistake, now standing over him in the middle of a firefight, come to save his life. "Whitaker," he said, and there was so much in that one word. "You shouldn't be here. You're going to get yourself killed." "So you keep telling me," Maya said, "Uish." "And yet," she grabbed his gear. "On your feet, Commander. Everyone else is out. Doyle's stable. The hostages are secure. You're the last one, and I'm not leaving without you, so the faster you move, the faster we both stop being targets." And she pulled him up, and she guided him out the same way she'd guided all the others, reading the gaps, finding the path. And she brought Commander Ethan Caldwell out of that compound alive, the very last one exactly as she'd promised. They made the vehicle, all of them. 4 SEALs, 3 hostages, and 1 recruit who was never supposed to be inside the wire at all. They loaded Marcus, still gray, but alive, the tourniquet, holding his big hand gripping Maya's wrists like he'd never let go. They loaded the shaken hostages. They loaded themselves, and the vehicle roared away into the dark, away from the compound, away from a mission that should have ended with a wall covered in names. And in the back of that vehicle, in the ringing quiet that comes after violence, the men of Bravo 12 looked at Maya Whitaker, and not one of them could speak, because they finally understood. They understood that everything, the whole 3 weeks, the whole strange selection cycle, the dead zone, all of it had been leading to this, to the moment when their careful, confident, elite team fell apart in the face of real chaos, and the one person they tried to break was the only one who could hold it together. It was Caldwell who finally broke the silence. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question. "Not the dead zone. This. Exactly this. Walking into chaos and pulling people out. You've done it before. Many times." Maya was quiet for a moment, checking Marcus's tourniquet, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Yes," she said finally. "Where?" Caldwell said. "Where did you learn to do what you just did? Because that wasn't a recruit in there. That wasn't someone who just finished selection. That was," he searched for the word, "that was someone who's lived in the middle of disasters, who's more at home in chaos than any of us will ever be. Who are you, Whitaker? Who are you really?" And in the back of that vehicle, with the men she'd just saved, staring at her, with Marcus's hand still gripping her wrist, and the hostages weeping quietly, and the commander who'd once humiliated her, waiting for an answer, Maya Whitaker was quiet for a long moment. And then she began to tell them. Not everything, not all of it. Some of it she would never be able to tell anyone, and they would come to understand why. But she told them enough. She told them about the years that were blacked out in her file. She told them about the disasters she'd walked into when everyone else walked out. She told them about the collapsed buildings and the sinking ships and the burning towers and the places so bad that trained soldiers had frozen and failed. And how she'd gone in anyway again and again, because someone had to. And she'd discovered a long time ago that she was one of the few people on Earth who could keep her head when the whole world came apart. And then she told them the last piece, the piece that changed everything, the piece that made Commander Ethan Caldwell close his eyes and understand at last the full shape of what had been done to his team. "I wasn't sent to your base to pass selection," Maya said quietly. "I passed harder tests than that a long time ago. I was sent there for a different reason." She looked at Caldwell. "The people I work for are the ones whose names you're not allowed to say. They've been worried about something. They've been worried that the best teams in this country, the elite ones, the proud ones, have started to believe their own legend. That they've gotten so sure of their own strength that they've forgotten the things that actually keep operators alive. Humility, patience, the willingness to learn, the willingness to back for each other no matter the cost." She paused. "So they designed an evaluation. Not of me, of you. They put me on your base, quiet, underestimated, and they watched to see what your team would do." The silence in the vehicle was absolute. "The dead zone was never a test of whether I could survive," Maya said. "You figured that out already, some of you. It was a test of whether you could overcome your own arrogance long enough to see what was standing right in front of you. And tonight," she looked around at all of them, "tonight was the final exam, not planned, real. But it asked the same question. When everything falls apart, when the plan dies and the comms drop and a brother is bleeding out and there's no help coming, what does your team become?" She looked down at Marcus, at his hand on her wrist. And you passed, she said softly. Every one of you. Because when I went into that compound, I wasn't going in to save strangers who'd mistreated me. I was going in to save men who 4 days ago were ready to break every rule and walk into the dead zone to save me. Men who'd learned. Men who'd changed. She looked up at Caldwell. That's the only reason I stayed, Commander. From the very first day when you dumped my bag in the mud, I was watching to see if you were worth saving. And you were. Caldwell put his face in his hands. And the hard commander, the man who broke arrogant recruits, the man who had spent 22 years certain he knew everything there was to know about what made a warrior, wept quietly in the back of a vehicle, speeding away from a compound where he should have died, humbled beyond anything he had ever imagined, saved by the very person he had tried hardest to destroy. I called you a mistake, he said from behind his hands, his voice broken. The first thing I ever did, I called you a mistake. I know, Maya said gently, and you came back for me anyway. You came back for all of us, even after everything. Maya reached over and she put her hand on the commander's shoulder, and she said the thing that every man in that vehicle would carry with them for the rest of their lives. That's what the whole thing was about, Commander, she said quietly. That's the only lesson that ever mattered. A great soldier doesn't need to prove they're stronger than everyone else. A great soldier protects the mission and protects the people beside them, no matter what those people did yesterday. She looked around at all of them, at the team she had saved, at the men who had tried to break her and failed and become better for it. You don't build the strongest teams by finding perfect people. You build them out of people who are willing to become better. And tonight, every one of you became better. The vehicle drove on through the dark toward home, toward safety, toward a base where none of them would ever be the same again. And in the back of it, the men of Bravo 12 sat in silence around the woman they had underestimated, understanding at last that the person everyone had refused to see was the person who had seen all of them most clearly of all, and had chosen despite everything to come back into the fire and carry them home. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt almost strange after so much noise. Marcus Doyle was in a hospital bed, his legs saved the surgeons telling him he'd walk again, and in time run again, all because a tourniquet had gone on high and fast in the right hands at the right moment. He was alive because of Maya, and he knew it. Everyone knew it. But the story wasn't over, because there were still questions that hadn't been answered, and there were still men on that team who were wrestling with what had happened to them, and there was still a truth waiting to come fully into the light. It came on the third day after the mission, when a man arrived at the base whom none of the team had ever seen before. He came without fanfare. No entourage, no announcement. Just an older man in plain clothes with steady eyes and a quiet way of carrying himself, the kind of man who has spent his whole life in rooms where the most important decisions are made and never once needed to raise his voice. He walked into the base and he asked for Commander Caldwell and the men of Bravo 12. And when they gathered, Caldwell felt his stomach tighten because he recognized something in this man's bearing. "You're him," Caldwell said. The voice on the phone. The man inclined his head slightly. "I've had a few names over the years," he said. "None of them matter. What matters is that I'm the one who sent Maya Whitaker to your base. And I've come to close the loop because you men have earned a full accounting of what happened to you. You've earned the truth." He sat down with them and he told them. He told them that the concern had been real and had been growing for years, that the country's most elite units, the proud ones, the legendary ones, had begun to develop a sickness that no enemy could inflict on them, a sickness they inflicted on themselves. Arrogance. The slow, quiet rot that sets in when a team becomes so good, so decorated, so certain of its own greatness, that it stops being able to see its own blind spots. Teams that had started to believe their reputation was a substitute for humility, teams that had started to look at anyone who didn't fit their image and decide without evidence that such a person couldn't possibly belong. "We lost people to it," the man said quietly. "Not in ways that made the news, but we lost them. Good operators who died because their team was too proud to adapt, too sure of the plan to see it failing, too locked into who they thought they were to become who they needed to be. And every time it happened, I asked myself the same question. How do you test a team for arrogance? How do you measure something a team can't even see in itself?" "And your answer was her," Caldwell said. "My answer was her," the man agreed, "because Maya Whitaker is without exaggeration one of the most capable people I have ever known. Her record, the parts of it I'm allowed to describe, and the parts I'm not, would stop your heart. She has walked into the worst disasters this world has produced and walked out carrying the people everyone else gave up on. And she has done it every single time without ever once needing to be recognized for it. She would rather be underestimated. It's who she is. He looked around at them. So I gave her the hardest assignment I've ever given anyone. Harder than any disaster. I asked her to walk onto a base full of proud, decorated warriors, let them believe she was nothing, let them mistreat her, let them try to break her, and to endure all of it quietly, watching, measuring, to see whether underneath the arrogance there was still something worth saving. The room was silent. "And the dead zone?" Ray asked. "The dead zone was the mirror," the man said. "A place where I knew she would excel precisely because it rewards the very qualities your team had forgotten. Patience over force, humility over ego, studying the problem instead of attacking it. I wanted your team to watch her do the impossible in there, and I wanted you to have to ask yourselves how a person you dismissed as a mistake could do something none of you could do. I wanted that question to haunt you." He paused. "And then, when the real mission came, when everything fell apart the way real missions do, I wanted to see the answer. I wanted to see whether the lesson had landed, whether when it counted, your team had become something better than it was. And the compound," Tyler said, his voice tight, "the bad intel, the numbers being wrong, the was that did you," the man held up a hand. "No," he said firmly. "Let me be very clear because this matters. The mission was real. The hostages were real. The danger was real. I did not manufacture that, and I would never gamble your lives or theirs for a lesson. The bad intel was a genuine failure, the kind that happens in this line of work, and it nearly cost all of you everything." His expression darkened. "What I did was ensure that Maya was on your support element that night. That much I arranged, because I had a feeling, an old soldier's feeling, that the real test was coming, and I wanted her close when it did. But the chaos was real. The bullets were real, and what she did in there, she did because that is who she is, not because I scripted it." He looked at each of them in turn. "You passed," he said simply. "All of you. Not because you fought well, though you did. You passed because when your teammate was bleeding out and the plan was dead and there was no help coming, you didn't scatter into every man for himself. And you passed because 4 days earlier, when you thought Maya was dying in the dead zone, you were ready to throw away your careers and break every rule to go in after her. That readiness, that willingness to go back for each other, no matter the case. That is the thing that had gone missing in the teams we lost, and it's the thing I found alive in you." He stood. "That's why you're still here. That's why you get to keep doing this, because underneath all the arrogance, you were still worth saving. Most aren't. You were." And then he did something that surprised them. He turned to the door and he said, "There's someone who should hear the rest of this from her, not from me." And Maya walked in. She'd been outside the whole time, and now she came in quietly, the same as she'd come onto the base that first day. No fanfare, no expectation. And the man who had sent her nodded to her once, a nod that carried years of trust and respect in it, and then he quietly left the room, leaving her with the team. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Tyler Voss stood up, the young man who had broken her compass, who had frozen when Perez went down, who had been surrounded in that compound and pulled out through a gap only she could see. He stood up and his jaw was working, and finally he said the thing he'd been carrying since the very beginning. "I broke your compass," he blurted, "during the navigation exercise. It wasn't a malfunction. I did it. I adjusted it because I wanted you to get lost, because I couldn't stand that you were better than me. And I've been sick about it ever since. And you knew the whole time, and you never turned me in. And then in that compound, you came and you saved my life. And I don't understand how a person does that. How do you save the life of someone who tried to sabotage you?" Maya looked at him for a long moment. "Because you were a scared kid who made a bad choice, Voss," she said gently. "And I've made worse. And because I could see even then what you could become if you got past it." She almost smiled. "I told you at the dead zone. I said you were going to be a good one someday. I meant it. And a good one is worth going back for even after a bad day. Especially after a bad day." Tyler's face crumpled, and he sat down and he put his head in his hands, and Ray Ortega reached over and gripped his shoulder, and nobody said anything because there was nothing that needed saying. Then Danny Reyes, the Joker, the one who could find something funny in a house fire, spoke up, and for once, there was nothing funny in his voice. I keep thinking about the mess hall, he said. The first night, we sat there and we tore you apart. We called you a favor, a mistake, a nobody. We decided who you were before you'd said 10 words to us. And you were sitting right there, weren't you, at the far end? You heard all of it. I heard all of it, Maya confirmed. And you saved us anyway. I saved you because of who you became, Maya said. Not who you were that night. People aren't fixed Reyes. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing I've ever really learned in all the bad places I've been. The person who's cruel on Monday can be the person who carries you out on Friday. You just have to give them the room to change and be paying attention when they do. Ray Ortega, who had read her right from the very first day, who had said she carried scars and not just training, spoke last. I knew, he said quietly, not the details, but I knew from that first run when you turned around for Doyle that you were something none of us understood. I told them. I said we were asking the wrong question. He shook his head slowly. But even I didn't guess the half of it. Even I thought on some level that we were the ones being tested and you were the test. I never once considered that you might be a person too. That underneath whatever you are, whatever those blacked out years hold, there might be someone who was tired and hurting and lonely, sitting at the end of a mess hall, listening to a room full of strangers decide she was worthless. He looked at her and his voice caught. That must have been hard, and you never let it show, not once. And for the first time in the entire story, Maya Whitaker's calm cracked just slightly, just for a moment. It was hard, she admitted softly. It's always hard. People think the hard part of what I do is the danger. The buildings falling, the water rising, the bullets. It's not. The danger I know how to handle. The hard part is the being alone in it, the being underestimated, the walking into a room full of people who've already decided you're nothing and knowing you can't tell them the truth and having to earn every inch of their respect the slow way in silence while they laugh at you. She looked around at them. I've done it my whole life, and it never stops hurting. I just learned a long time ago not to let the hurt make my decisions for me. The room was very quiet, and then Caldwell, who had been silent through all of it, stood up. The commander had changed more than any of them. The hard man who dumped a duffel bag in the mud was gone, and in his place was someone quieter, someone who had been broken open and put back together differently. He walked over to Maya, and he stood in front of her, and there was a long moment where it seemed like all the weight of the last weeks was pressing down on him at once. I've been trying to figure out how to say this, Caldwell said, and I don't think there are words big enough, so I'm just going to say the small ones and hope you understand what's behind them. He took a breath. I was wrong about you in every way a man can be wrong about another person, and you saved my life anyway. You saved all our lives, and you did it without ever once asking us to feel bad, without ever once holding it over us, without ever once making us grovel. He shook his head. I spent 22 years thinking I understood strength, and it turns out I had it exactly backwards. I thought strength was the ability to break other people. You showed me that real strength is the ability to lift them, even the ones who don't deserve it, especially the ones who don't deserve it. He extended his hand. I don't have any right to ask you for anything, Caldwell said. But if you'd be willing, my team would be honored to have you. Not as a recruit who has something to prove, as one of us, as frankly, the best of us. And I'd consider it the privilege of my career to learn from you for whatever time you'll give us. Maya looked at his outstretched hand, and then she took it. I'd like that, she said. And something in the room let go some tension that had been building since the very first day, and the men of Bravo 12 finally fully understood that the strange and painful and extraordinary thing they'd been living through had come to its proper end. But Maya wasn't quite done, because there was one more thing she needed to say, and she said it to all of them, and it was the thing that would echo in that team for years to come, long after the details of the dead zone and the compound had faded into the worn, smooth stories that old warriors tell. I want to tell you something before we go any further, Maya said, because I think you're carrying some guilt about how you treated me, and I want to take that weight off you because it's not doing anyone any good. She looked around at them. You were never bad men. That's important. I've served alongside bad men, and you're not them. You were good men who'd caught a bad sickness. The sickness that tells you your reputation is who you are. The sickness that tells you the person who looks different, who came up a different way, who doesn't fit the picture in your head, can't possibly belong. It's one of the most common sicknesses there is and the most dangerous because it feels like confidence. It feels like standards. It feels like protecting something important. But underneath, it's just fear wearing a uniform. She let that sit for a moment. The reason I'm not angry with you, she went on, is that the moment it counted, every one of you chose to be better. When you thought I was dying in the dead zone, you chose to go back for me, even though it meant ending your careers. When the compound fell apart, you chose to hold together instead of scattering. You chose over and over in the moments that actually mattered to be the kind of men worth saving. And a person's choices in the moments that matter tell you far more about who they are than their worst day at a dinner table. She smiled, and it was a warm, real smile. So let it go. All of it. You've more than made up for a bad first impression. You saved 3 innocent people the other night, and you did it as a team, and that's the only scoreboard that counts. And the men let it go. They let go of the guilt and the shame and the strange disorienting grief of realizing how wrong they'd been. And in its place, they let in something better. Something Maya had been trying to give them since the very first day. Humility. The clean, freeing humility of people who finally learned that they don't have all the answers and that the world is bigger than their picture of it and that the person you underestimate might be the person who carries you home. In the months that followed, Bravo 12 became something the base had never seen before. They didn't become stronger exactly. They were already about as physically strong as men could be. What changed was something harder to name and far more important. They became humble. They became teachable. They stopped assuming they knew everything, and they started asking questions, and they started looking twice at the people they might once have dismissed. And a strange thing happened, the thing that always happens when a proud team finally learns humility. They got better. Not a little better, dramatically better, because a team that thinks it already knows everything can't learn anything, but a team that's willing to admit what it doesn't know can learn without limit. They became, within a year, one of the most respected units in the entire country. And everyone assumed it was because of some new training, some new equipment, some new hard-charging philosophy. It wasn't any of that. It was because a quiet woman had walked onto their base, let them believe she was nothing, endured their cruelty in silence. And then when it counted, most walked into fire to carry them home, and in doing so, had taught them the one lesson that all their years of training had somehow missed. Marcus Doyle recovered fully and ran again. And every year on the anniversary of that mission, he called Maya wherever in the world she was just to say thank you. And every year she told him he didn't need to, and every year he called anyway. Tyler Voss became exactly the good one Maya had promised he'd be, and he became known throughout the teams as the operator most likely to give a struggling newcomer a fair chance. And when anyone asked him why, he'd say he'd once learned the hard way what it cost to underestimate someone, and he never elaborated. Danny Reyes kept his humor but lost his cruelty and became the one who welcomed at every new arrival, no matter how they looked or where they came from. And Ray Ortega, who'd read her right from the start, became Caldwell's right hand, the quiet conscience of the team, the one who could always be counted on to ask the question everyone else was afraid to ask. As for Commander Ethan Caldwell, he never stopped being humbled by what had happened to him. He kept it with him close, like a man keeps a scar that reminds him of the day he almost died and didn't. He'd built his whole identity on breaking people, on being the hardest man in the room, and a woman he'd tried to break had shown him a strength that made his own look small and cheap. And rather than resent her for it, he'd let it change him all the way down. He became the kind of commander who lifted people instead of breaking them, who watched for the quiet ones who never again looked at a person's packaging and assumed he knew what was inside. He often said in the years afterward that he'd been a good commander before Maya Whitaker and a great one after, and that the difference between the two was the single most important thing he'd ever learned. And Maya stayed for a while, and then the way people like her always do, she moved on to the next place that needed her, the next disaster, the next impossible situation where someone had to walk in while everyone else walked out. She never sought recognition for what she'd done at Coronado, just as she'd never sought it for anything else. She simply went where she was needed and did what needed doing and let the people she helped underestimate her, because being underestimated was safer, and because she'd made her peace with the loneliness of it a long, long time ago. But she left something behind on that base that outlasted her. She left a team that had learned to see. And in the years that came after, when Bravo 12 trained the next generation of operators, they did it differently than they'd been trained themselves. When a new recruit arrived who didn't fit the picture, who came up a different way, who arrived quiet and unimpressive with no connections and nothing to prove, the men of Bravo 12 didn't dump their bag in the mud. They didn't call them a mistake. They remembered. They remembered a woman who'd walked onto their base and let them believe she was nothing and who had turned out to be the best of all of them. And they gave that new recruit the one thing they'd once refused to give her: a fair chance. Because that was the real thing Maya Whitaker had taught them, deeper than any tactic, more lasting than any skill. She taught them that the strongest teams are never built by finding perfect people, because perfect people don't exist. The strongest teams are built out of ordinary people who are willing to become better than they were willing to admit when they're wrong, willing to go back into the fire for each other no matter what came before. She taught them that the person everyone underestimates, the one they laugh at, the one they're so sure doesn't belong, is very often the one who's been to darker places than any of them and survived and come back with the only wisdom that ever really matters. And she'd taught them the truth that Commander Caldwell would repeat to every recruit he trained for the rest of his career, the truth that had cost him his pride and given him back something far more valuable. The truth that all of it, the whole long, painful, extraordinary journey, had finally hammered into the heart of a team that had once forgotten it. A great soldier does not need to prove they are stronger than everyone else. A great soldier protects the mission and protects the people beside them and goes back into the dark for them, no matter what those people did yesterday. Maya Whitaker had walked into the dead zone alone, and she had walked out alone, and everyone had thought that was the whole story, but it never was. The dead zone was never the test. The test was whether a room full of proud men could learn to see the person right in front of them before it was too late. And because they finally did, 3 innocent hostages went home to their families. 5 soldiers came out of a compound that should have killed them. And one of the finest teams this country ever produced was born not out of strength, but out of humility. The person everyone underestimated was the person who saw the truth that everyone else refused to see. And in the end, she did not just survive the dead zone. She saved every single person who sent her into it.